joining. I'm Neil Coyle. I'm the new Secretary of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Migration. Thank you very much to everyone at RAMP and IMIX for the partnership in making this happen, and for, in particular, RAMP for the Secretariat for the All-Party Group. Without the work of RAMP and Vinya and Heather and Laura and others, we would not be able to get events like this that I hope will continue. I think Zoom has made Parliament a bit more accessible in some ways, as a positive of a spin-off of the COVID arrangements that have changed how we operate in Parliament. But it's RAMP's work that have made this possible, so thank you. And whilst I'd like us to be even more effective, it's the partnership with RAMP and IMIX that I hope will deliver success going forward. I'm the Labour MP for Bermondsey and Old Southwark. The All-Party Group is cross-party, and there are other parliamentarians joining. I can't see who's in yet, but be assured, if you are there and you want to ask a question early on, as parliamentarians have a privilege in the group to come first, then just let me know, give me a nudge. I also have eyes on who's there. Some housekeeping, I should have said. So you're going to hear some excellent speakers. If you have particular questions, please put them in the chat box. You should have access to the chat at the bottom of your screen, then it'll appear on the right. So just add your question and we'll try and get through as many as possible. If you are called to ask a question, we only have an hour, so please do keep questions brief, short. If it's an individual casework issue, please email RAMP to try and get some help. Don't try and raise what could be a very complex individual question here. The RAMP email is appgmigration@rampproject.org. That will go in the chat box so that you have it. It may already be there. There's something in there. There you go. It's a message. So welcome from Vinya. But yeah, if you pop the email in there for more difficult, longer term issues, just keep the questions for our panelists today. I should have said very, very briefly, my constituent, I'm one of the parliamentarians who believes that migration has always benefited the United Kingdom. We would not have the strength in our economy or community that we see were it not for successive waves of migration. My own surname is Irish. My family came over during the Irish potato famine, and so technically refugees, really. It was desperate circumstances led my family to leave. And my community is very diverse and has a vibrancy to it that is only a positive. In my constituency, we've also had a strong partnership with Migrant Entrepreneurs Network, who do projects with the Institute Directors. So I'm looking forward to getting stuck more into the work of the All-Party Group. But you don't want to hear from me today. I think I'm going to check I've done the housekeeping right. The only other bit of housekeeping I think was, please do not unmute yourselves until we get through the panelists, and if you're called to speak, you'll be invited to unmute yourself, I think is how it's going to work. So watch that space. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. Brilliant. Right. Is that nod if I've done all the housekeeping? Good. Right. So without I think everyone was sent a synopsis, a background to today's discussions, and protecting vulnerable EU citizens was the overarching theme, with a particular focus on children in foster care and care leavers, members of the Roma community, third country national married to EU citizens, and people suffering from digital exclusion. So there will be broad discussion around that. There are two primary speakers, and then the intent is to have someone with direct personal experience and then a short discussion session before we get into the Q&A. So welcome again, everybody, and I'm going to hand over to Dr. Mariña Fernández-Reino, who's a senior researcher at the Migration Observatory, apologies, at the University of Oxford. So over to you, Mariña.
I'm going to share my screen so everybody can see the... Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So thank you for this opportunity to present this report update that we just published last week or 2 weeks ago, and it builds on a previous report that we wrote in 2018 when the EU settlement scheme hadn't launched yet, and In this report, we updated the narrative, but we also include additional groups that we didn't include in our 2018 report. So I'm not going to focus so much in specific groups, but in the main challenges of the scheme, the problems that some groups, some of which we will discuss later, might face in order to secure a status. Okay. So far, as of end of August 2020, to the EU settlement scheme, 3.91 million applications have been received and 3.7 million applications have been concluded. Of these applications concluded, 57% correspond to settled status applications, 43% to pre-settled status, and there are around 11,000 applications who were refused. Applicants, maybe this issue comes up later, applicants can be refused for not meeting either the eligibility criteria or the criminality requirements. And most eligibility refusals are actually due to lack of residence evidence or failure to show a relationship to an EU citizen. Because even though we usually, these people are not discussed in the media, but some non-EU citizens are eligible to apply to the EU settlement scheme. As of June 2020, 49% of these refused applications correspond to non-EU citizens. And then there are around 38,000 invalid applications, and these are the case, for example, of people that apply with expired ID card or with an identity evidence that is not accepted by the Home Office. The application process to apply to the EU settlement scheme in order to secure either pre-settled or settled status is online mostly, and is relatively fast for most applicants. There are 3 steps. First, the identity and citizenship checking. Applicants basically need to provide a valid passport or ID card, or in the case of non-EU citizens, EEA residence card. Then there is also a residence checking, mainly through automated checks where applicants provide their national insurance number. And then finally, there's a criminality checking, what is known as the suitability requirement, which is self-declaratory, but then this declaration, it's a check against police records and also overseas criminality records. The identity and citizenship evidence is the first step of the application because all applicants need to provide a valid passport or ID card. Though, I mean, there are some cases where the Home Office might accept alternative evidence, and this probably we'll discuss this later because some groups are more likely to be in the situation of not having a valid passport or ID card or having an expired passport. And in this case, but mostly this type of applicants will need help in order to apply because usually they are not aware of what type of evidence is admitted or they can provide. People lacking valid identity evidence are, for example, might be, for example, children in care or recent care leavers, victims of domestic abuse or of victims of trafficking, homeless people or rough sleepers, or some a large share of the migrant Roma communities. And there are also applications which are based on the derivative right of residence. And in some cases, non-EU applicants might, like evidence, provide this present or past relationship to a qualifying EU citizens. And in many cases, they also need assistance to submit their application. The second step, it's applicants need to provide evidence of their continuous residence in the UK. This process is, the requirements are relatively easy to get pre-settled status, which is the status that you get when you've been in the UK for less than 5 years. And many cases, actually in the early testing phases, we know that around 90% of applicants provided their national insurance number, and many of them, most of them, they didn't need to provide additional evidence. So basically, this residence evidence was, let's say, automatically checked by the records, administrative records that the UK government already has of the applicants. However, some people that might have been in the UK for 5 years or more might struggle to provide evidence of this continuous residence, and then might be granted pre-settled status instead of the more secure pre-settled status. This could be the case, for example, of people who do not appear in the administrative records, either of the HMRC or the DWP, and need to provide alternative evidence. actually there's an overlap, because many vulnerable groups or vulnerable citizens who might have been here for longer than 5 years might not be in this administrative record. So they will need to show that they have been in the UK for 5 years, and they might actually struggle to actually collect evidence showing that this has been the case. Also think about the case of people living in precarious or non-standard housing, which that includes a large share of the migrant community, migrant Roma population, also homeless people and other groups that are also likely to be in this situation of not being able to provide evidence of 5 years in the UK. And finally, the suitability requirement, which is basically the criminality checks that is self-declaratory, as mentioned earlier. Applicants are required to disclose their criminal records, and actually the failure to do so could lead to refusal of this application. In theory, we don't know the exact number, but we know that actually so far the number of applications who have been rejected because of not suitability grounds, so in relation to criminality, has been very small. But we don't know the number of people who have not applied because they are afraid of that they might not be accepted because of that, because they might have a criminal record. Then we know also in general that there are many reasons why people might not apply to government programs. That includes the EU settlement scheme, but that also we have evidence from many other government programs that you can think about that usually not, it's very rare that 100% of people who are eligible end up applying. And there are multiple reasons that explain that. Some reasons are more related to the characteristics of applicants, like the cases I mentioned before. Maybe this person cannot provide evidence, or maybe it's not digitally, the digital literacy is very low, or maybe they are not actually literate at all, and they might struggle with the application. Also, the participation depends on the application itself, how easy it is for participants to register in a particular program. This is actually we know the UK government acknowledges the fact that many vulnerable citizens might end up not applying for several reasons depending on the group, and this is why several millions have been awarded to more than 50 charities that are working with the specific groups of the eligible population, helping them with their application process. These we are going to discuss later more particular groups and what are the specific challenges associated to their application. But for example, many citizens might not be aware of the EU settlement scheme. And this is particularly so in the current circumstances where the whole discussion of the EU settlement scheme and the Brexit process is not so much present in the media as it used to be, mainly because of the coronavirus, because that has, let's say, more media attention at the moment. And we know from previous evidence that media attention to a particular program raises awareness. So people become aware, and because of that, they apply. And in other cases, people might be aware of the scheme, but they might think that it's not for them, and it's only more for recent arrivals to the UK, so they don't need to apply. That could happen to very long residents, which are usually elderly people who are less likely to be digital literate. Also, people with permanent residence documents who might not be aware that these PR documents are no longer they are no longer valid after December 2020, the children of EU citizens who rely on their parents for applying, people who have been rejected before for permanent residence, people also who are expecting to return home, people without a good social network. So there are many people who might fall in this category that they are just simply not aware of the scheme. Then there are also people who might struggle to navigate the process, so they might be aware of the scheme, but they might need help from family members, friends, or external assistance in order to apply. This could be eligible people that are low, their proficiency in English is low, they have also low levels of literacy, or particularly in this case, because it's an online process, mainly low digital literacy. We know that this is particular the case of elderly people. Also the case of people who lack mental capacity, whose family members or carers are not aware of the scheme, so they don't apply for them. Also people with serious mental health problems or with other health problems of disabilities. Obviously, some of these people might get help, and there are also, the Home Office have put in place several programs for these people, so they have help to apply, and also there are organizations who can help them, but obviously not everybody is aware that this external help is available for them, so they might not apply, or they might just postpone the application and end up missing the deadline. There are also, then these are the cases that are probably now more present in the media, people that are already facing social exclusion for various reasons, and because of that they are not applying. This could include children in care or recent care leavers, victims of domestic abuse, victims of trafficking, people who are living in extreme poverty, also homeless people or rough sleepers, and also the migrant Roma communities who we'll discuss later. Also, not only socially vulnerable group might lack evidence, as mentioned earlier. Some people, particularly elder people, might lack identity evidence. So because of their passport is expired, and depending on the time when they realize that their passport is expired, they might not have enough time to apply for a new one. Also, people lacking evidence to a qualifying EU citizen. People also non-standard housing or non-standard employment, who are might be able to secure pre-settled status, but they might struggle to provide evidence of settled status, even if they have been here for 5 years or longer. One of the main problems that maybe the EU settlement scheme we need to minimize, even though we know that probably there's going to be a percentage of people that doesn't apply, is what happens to those who miss the deadline, because as things stand now, they will become irregular migrants and will be subjected to the hostile environment after June 2020. So in theory, the Home Office will accept people that do not apply due to reasonable grounds, but we still don't know how many applications we are going to see, what are, let's say, the reasons that people can give in order to apply later after the deadline. Another challenge for this scheme is people who might fail to convert from pre-settled to settled status. Applying, as I mentioned earlier, to pre-settled status is relatively easy, but some people might end up getting this status because they cannot provide evidence of their residence in the UK for the 5 years required. And some of these people, particularly those who are in more vulnerable, socially vulnerable situations, might not be aware that they need to reapply in the future. At the moment, we don't have data to monitor who converts from pre-settled to settled status. And we know that the Home Office, in theory, will tell the applicants that they will need to apply when their deadline when the pre-settled status ends, and so they will send reminders to people, but obviously that depends that their contact details don't change or that they are updated. So there are some challenges here, and precisely some of the people that might be at risk of not secure any status might also be the people who fail to convert the pre-settled status to settled status afterwards. One important thing that we might discuss earlier is among pre-settled status holders. Not everybody, and this is an important factor, might be aware that having absences longer than 6 months after the cutoff date could make them ineligible for getting settled status in the future. And this is very important because these people at the end will rights to get permanent settlement. One of the main shortcomings that we have discussed, we also highlighted in this report and other reports published by the Migration Observatory, is the lack of data to measure non-applicants. At the moment, we don't really know how to identify people, and particularly importantly, the characteristics of residents who are eligible but who haven't applied to the EU settlement scheme. We know that some applicants or some people that certain groups in society might, because of their vulnerabilities, might be more likely to miss the deadline, but we don't have numbers. And this is an important issue that probably we will discuss more as soon as the deadline approaches. So also, we don't have data about whether people that are applying have been granted the right status. So whether, for example, people that have been here 5 years or longer, but they are not able to provide evidence, so they get the less secure pre-settled status. And also at the moment, we lack data of people who upgrade. So we assume that the number of applications of people who apply for pre-settled status and they upgrade is likely to be small at the moment, but this number will increase, and we will need to have data about these people in order to see how many people also converts upgrades their status and who don't. And also some suggestions about how the data can be improved. Probably the census in 2021 will shed more light about particular vulnerable groups that are less likely to be included in regular surveys, but we expect them to be better captured in the census. Also, linking administrative records could help, but as I said before, some people, particularly those who are more vulnerable, are less likely to be precisely in the administrative records. So these people might be completely missed by the Home Office. And also including in the official survey data, like the labor force survey, ask respondents about their residence or immigration status could also help us to identify which groups are less likely to apply or haven't applied yet. In general, one of the main things that I think it's important to take into account is that in almost all government programs, having a 100% take-up rate, it's very difficult, and especially in a short period of time like the EU settlement scheme, because it's not 5 years, it's only 2 years. So it's likely that even if it's a relatively easy process, some people might not be aware of the scheme or might struggle to provide evidence of the eligibility. So even if it's only a small percentage, 5%, this could mean thousands of people might not have any right of residence after June 2021. And this is precisely the case of people who are already vulnerable for other reasons, who are living in poverty or who are socially vulnerable, like I think Mihai will discuss later the case of migrant Roma communities. And yes, so that's if you have any questions, we can discuss it later.
Mariña, that's an amazing run through. There's so much in there that it's prompted me with questions, but I will hold back and remind people, if you have questions, please do put them in the discussion, the chat box. I can see there's at least one already in there. So thanks again, Mariña. Just quickly, I should have, apologies, I should have given the chair of the all-party groups apologies, David Simmons, who's a Conservative MP, couldn't be with us today, which is why I am chairing this. And can I welcome, I think we've got Baroness Hanway, who's the vice chair of the group, attending. I think Holly Lynch, who's a Labour MP for Halifax, and Tim Farron, who's a former Lib Dem leader, are in here somewhere. But we don't have a huge amount of time, so I'm just going to keep ploughing on. One other thing I should have pointed out is that this is being recorded for online and sharing and greater use and greater engagement. So I hope everyone is fine with that. You can still pop your question in the chat box if you're not, or email. I'm going to hand over to Luke Piper now, who's an immigration lawyer and head of policy at the 3 Million. So Luke, over to you.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you for getting invited to this. I will keep it brief. I'm keen to hear from people who are on this call today about their personal lived experiences of the scheme and the issues associated with acquisition status. But one thing I will lead and say is I feel that there is and that's not to say that people on this call are guilty of this, but I fear that there is a playing down of the consequences to those who do not apply to the EU settlement scheme. And to kind of lead with a point that the best UK performing campaign for converting people into something was the switching to everyone to digital TV many years ago. And 97% of people signed up by the time of that switch from analog TV to digital. So that leaves 3%. Now, if you project those figures, that's over 100,000 people who will be at risk of losing their legal status in the framework that was just described earlier. That means hundreds of thousands of people are potentially quite a serious risk of losing jobs, access to housing, benefits, access to healthcare even. And I'm very concerned that there does seem to be a distraction from that. And I do feel that there really does need to be pulling in the focus on that. With that in mind, what this report has shown is that percentage, even if it is 3%, and I'm not saying it is, it's just that's a very, very generous risk percentage, will be the most vulnerable, will be the people that were just described before in those slides. Now, one that I wanted to just talk about briefly was an overview of the solutions. Now, there've been many solutions that many organisations, including the one that I work with, the 3 million, that have proposed, that are very policy driven around creating legal safety nets and policy safety nets for those people who don't apply in time or apply late. Now, those policy concerns have been rejected repeatedly, unfortunately. So we are left with focusing on what solutions at present the government has put forward. And they simply put are a pot of money to fund organisations to assist people with applications, and a media campaign or a specific targeted campaign. My concern with those two approaches is I've no idea how well those funded organisations have got on so far. I've no insight into their performance, how their performance is measured, the kind of numbers involved and their prospects of success, and what is considered to be success through those funding sources. Nor do I have any idea about the scale of success and how the success is measured in terms of a targeted campaign. I understand that there is a move now towards more targeted, more specific work, and I still don't have an understanding of what that looks like. So it's very concerning that there is this lack of transparency around the methodology that's in place at present. There is a lot to be done. The risks are real, they are high, it's not hyperbole. And I hope that more can be done sooner rather than later, so we don't end up in a situation where we are having a conversation this time next year, several months after the deadline, and we're talking, constituents are contacting their MPs about the raft of problems that they are having, not just with getting their status, but with just living their lives day to day. So I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luke. And just to put some sort of human context to that, you're absolutely right to focus on the risks and consequences. I've seen that in a constituency like mine with the casework that came from the Windrush equivalent experience, where people were denied, in some cases thrown out of the country, in some cases, it was absolutely devastating consequences for them and for their whole families. So that is right to ramp that up. And given that there were 10,800 people from other EU member states living in Bermondsey and Old Southwark alone, that would mean more than 300 people in this smaller group we're talking about today. So it just gives an idea of context. And we're going to hear from someone with direct personal experience now. Arnd, I can't see you in here. Can you unmute? Are you there? Arnd? Where are you? Vinya, can you unmute Arnd if he's there? I can't.
Yeah, Arnd is dialing in, so if he's not able to unmute at the moment because he's on the phone, then we might come to him a bit later. We'll
have to come back to Arnd. We will be hearing from someone who is a German citizen living in the UK since 2005, who has direct experience, but virtual meetings being what they are, we will have to come back to Arnd. And so we'll quickly now move on to the next panel. Now, this is intended as a bit more of a discursive session with Rosie Lewis, Mihai, Bica, and Amanda Shah. if you want to quickly introduce yourselves and make your points to before we open up to the fuller discussion. And can I thank everyone who's already putting questions in the chat? Please keep doing that, and I will try and get through as many as we possibly can in the time allowed. So Rosie, do you want to start the next session?
Yes, I'm happy to come in. Hi, my name's Rosie. I'm from the Angelou Centre. We're a Black Minoritized Women's Centre based in the northeast of England. We're an open access centre, but a large number of our services are for women who've experienced violence and abuse. We have advocacy therapy, etc. But what's probably most pertinent is we provide a refuge specifically for women without recourse to public funds, which is very rare. There's only a couple of us in the country. So this, what I'm presenting today has been done in consultation with our Women's Voices group and from our survivors group. So these are women with lived experience, but obviously for safety reasons cannot give a testimony. So we're very concerned about the high numbers of EU women who are not accessing safety and protection and who are presenting our services who are knowing nothing about the EU settlement scheme or even their own status because of the abuse that they've been through, particularly looking at numbers of women who are rejected from safety and protection and services wider than just refuge services because of their perceived status or because they're considered to have no recourse to public funds, and also the high threshold of violence. I think something that was referenced is in the migratory observation report is that the numbers don't seem to be as comparatively high, but I think that's because a lot of women are too fearful or people are too fearful to disclose, and we've got to really understand that a lot of people are being pushed underground because of their perceived economic and immigration status. And what's happening is now we're a Black minoritized women's service, but we've now got 15% of the women who are accessing us are classed as under the as EU citizens. Yeah, so that's really risen in the last year. And for us, a really big issue is how we get in this lumped conglomeration of women who are considered to have no recourse to public funds. They fear the system. Often the system is used against them as a threat, and actually the system makes them more vulnerable and ensures in a way that abusers can control them further as well. And I think that's something that we need to consider. I really welcomed the report. The disaggregated data was absolutely critical, but I think a more nuanced approach really needs to be brought in around survivors of domestic abuse, remembering that it's the majority, you know, we need to see this through a gender-based lens. Yep. So domestic violence, sexual violence, etc., disproportionately impacts upon women. They face higher levels of socioeconomic exclusion. They're often the carers and often living in very disempowered situations. For the majority of women we support, you know, they've come over as dependents. They haven't worked in the UK. They don't understand UK systems. So I'm just going to very briefly go through, I think, 4 of the key points around the nuances around these issues. This number 1 is around the specific forms of abuse that aren't recognised and aren't assessed. I've talked about the higher thresholds of violence, that lack of disclosure because women don't trust services or services don't understand. But there's also from the other side, the fact that often women are not assessed properly. There's a real lack of understanding around the levels of honour-based violence that communities go through, and domestic slavery. I want to bring that up because often under modern day slavery, it's not included in there by services. They don't recognise it. And what happens is a lot of the women we support, even when there's other forms of exploitation, economic exploitation, they're not going through the national referral mechanism. So where are those numbers? Because I don't know whether they're included in the stats that have been presented, but we would say that often invisible victims. And I just want to really quickly read a quote in relation to this. My husband forced me to come here to the UK from France. He was an EU citizen. She wasn't an EU citizen. I came on a spouse visa. He lied and said I'd get status, and then he abused me and took everything. I lost a baby because of his violence. He raped me nearly every day. He threatened my family so I couldn't go home. After 2 years, I'm still fighting for my right to remain, although my daughter was born here and I've lived here for 4 years. I've been in the refuge, it's not a refuge, for 18 months. They give me everything, so we have to supply food, money, nappies, everything's needed for the babies. Social services don't support me. I have to wait. I have to wait here and my daughter grows. The government and the people outside of the Angelou Centre and the refuge, they don't care. The second point I want to raise is around the institutional barriers, yeah, where no recourse to public funds, it becomes a presumed status, and there's a lack of knowledge from services around women's rights. to access safety and protection. And also there's a lack of that specialist support or the recognition. There's broad inequalities. So we're talking about socioeconomic exclusion. Often the women are reliant on their families because they've come as dependents. And as we've already discussed, tech exclusion. If I tell you that 25% of the women, when we went on lockdown, that we support across the board did not have phones, never mind access to smartphones or access to data. Yeah, it's a really high proportion. And I'll just quickly bring in a quote there. Getting status meant nothing to me. When I couldn't get universal credit. Me and my 16-year-old daughter had to share a bed. My landlord said he was going to kick me out. If I'd not have got supporters from our centre, money, food, we would have had nothing. Before I got support, I was living on half a tin of beans every night. They told me I had to get a job, but my daughter has a high level of needs. She's severely autistic. So how could I work? And I've got PTSD from the violence. So very briefly bringing in the fourth area, which is the systemic exclusion. So this makes victims more dependent on the abusers. Yeah, so it isn't just about thinking about those individualized victims' vulnerabilities, it's also thinking about where they're placed within the context of the abuse, but also the further impact of the regulations around their status. So the idea about having no valid ID, or proof of having worked or proof of address. The majority of women who access our services do not have that. Part of the abuse they've gone through, as well as the threats around authority, has been about the fact they've had all their paperwork taken away from them, or they've not been told what their status or given false information. They've got very little evidence of economic activity. A number of the women that we've supported have had economic exploitation. So that's meant that they haven't been given wage slips. They thought they've worked legitimately, but they haven't been given wage slips by their employers. And also another issue I want to bring in is the domestic abuse bill, because unfortunately, as that bill rolls in, as many of the people here will know, and migrant women are excluded, well, EU citizen women are also with it or lumped into that category as well, and still can't access support. And it was very welcome to hear Neil talking about how some MPs really recognise the contribution that migrant communities make to our society, and it's a massive contribution. And just finally, I just want to finish about thinking about how intersecting issues that citizens with no recourse to public funds face are also intersecting systemic barriers. And we need those specialist services and a prioritization of safety and protection, regardless of status. And I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thanks loads, Rosie. And I know there were lots of MPs and who were trying to fight for the additional rights within the domestic abuse bill to be extended to everyone that needed them, not just those who had recourse to public funds, and that's a fight that continues. I also co-chair the homeless group in Parliament, and it's been a live issue for us, so that fight goes on. Mihai, over to you, please. Where are you? We haven't lost someone else, have we?
No, I'm here.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Hi everyone, my name is Mihai, Bica, and I'm working for the Roma support group in London. Over the past years, we have worked extensively supporting Roma communities successfully go through the Brexit process and access the EU settlement scheme. Today, I'm here to bring you a personal experience of a lady from the Roma community in relation to the EU settlement scheme. Unfortunately, she could not join us today. So this is Gina's story, and for the record, this is not her real name. My name is Gina, and I am an EU migrant living in the UK. I have 8 lovely children, and until recently, life was going well for us. My husband came to the UK in 2009. Since then, he had various jobs, managing to support us while still living in the country where we are from originally. In 2017, as a family, we decided it is best that we all move together here in the UK, and so we joined my husband here. Things changed for the better for all of us. Our children started school here, and I was able to find work as well. This year, unfortunately, things have changed dramatically. My husband lost his fight against COVID-19 in April. He also had diabetes. Over a year before that, we both started working for the same company in the warehouse industry. Since the pandemic started, we both had to drive to work. But after his passing, I could not go to work anymore. Public transport was not available, and I do not have a driving license. Also, my education is very limited, so it's very unlikely that I could pass a driving test. Soon after my husband died, I lost my job. Then we received a letter being informed that our tax credits are suspended. I had no idea what I could do, and I was desperate. With so many children and with one of them disabled, life is very hard when you cannot provide for your family. Then I found out I can make an universal credit application, which I have done twice. Each time I wasn't successful. And that is because I was asked to provide information which I could simply not access regarding my immigration status. We did apply for the EU settlement scheme, but I had no idea that I have to use the internet to access my details. And I don't even have the details I need to go on the internet to begin with. The Universal Credit asked me for a share code. I had no idea what is that and how can I get it. A charity that helps my family provided me with information regarding the share code, but we still had a problem. Only my husband knew the details required to access my digital status. With support from this charity, we managed to make the Universal Credit application successfully. But the digital status is still making problems for me. About 2 months ago, I started looking for work again, and I went for an interview, again in the warehouse industry. During the interview, I was asked for a proof of my residence in the UK. They told me, if you can give us a proof of your residence, send us a share code. If you cannot give us that, we can't give you a job. Again, I was not able to provide the details needed. I still don't know how to access my digital status. And I think it will help so many of us if we could simply have evidence, something in our hands, something that we can show to those asking us for our residence details. I would especially need something like that to be able to get work. Now, if I go to work or to find work or somewhere else, and someone asks me about this digital status or the share code, I don't even know what I have to show them. And on top of this, there are many who are trying to benefit from this situation. Many are aware of people like me and our vulnerabilities in this context and are offering support for money. Much of this could be avoided if we can have evidence, if we can have something that we can hold in our hands to be able to continue to live our lives peacefully here. I was invited to talk about this, to present you this story. And if you do want to find more about the experience of those from the Roma communities regarding EU settlement scheme, I invite everyone to have a look on our website. We have a special Brexit section there with loads of information, reports, statements and briefings that we have been working on recently. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mihai. And if you want to put the web address and any other links in the chat box as well for people, and I'm sure Ramp will share links and things in email follow up to this session as well. So thank you for that. And thank you to Lisa Driver, I think it is, who's put some links into other documents in other languages to help people going through the process, which will be useful for my constituents, for example. Amanda, Shah, we'll come to you now, and then I'm hoping Arvi's back with us. If not, we will move straight into questions. And thank you, everyone. Keep posting the questions in the chat box. Amanda, are you there?
I am. Hi.
Thank you.
Afternoon, everybody. My name's Amanda Shah. I work at Greater Manchester Immigration Aid Unit. Most of the people at GMAIU are either solicitors or legal caseworkers. I am not, but I've spent the last 2 years supporting local authorities trying to improve their support for children in care and care leavers with insecure immigration status. So it won't surprise you to hear that a lot of those conversations have been about children and young people affected by Brexit. So some of the work that we've been doing has, for example, been with Manchester City Council, who literally a couple of weeks before lockdown signed a pledge committing their support for this group of children and young people. And that's the kind of work at a strategic level that we've been pushing forward with. So the key question for this meeting, as I understood it, are vulnerable EU citizens falling through the cracks? And I would say in the case of children in care and care leavers, The answer is a resounding yes. They're doing so very publicly. And when we get to June 2021, the Home Office cannot say that they were not warned. So it brings us on to think about why, what is it about the EU settlement scheme that means that children in care and care leavers are more likely to miss out? And I wanted to flag 3 reasons, one of which is identification, the second of which is documentation, and the third of which is pre-settled status. So identification, I mean, fundamentally, it's been put to local authorities to identify those children in care and young people accessing leaving care services who are affected by Brexit immigration changes. And local authorities are not routinely collecting data on nationality. It's partly because the Department for Education doesn't require them to do so. So in short, when this process started, local authorities had no idea how many children and young people they were corporate parents to who were affected. And it's resulted for those who have then gone on to do the doing in a manual trawling exercise. And you've got social workers and personal advisors up and down the country who are literally manually trawling case files, trying to identify affected children and young people. And it will come as no surprise that that approach results in an awfully high potential for human error. So there are various figures that have been given, the most recent of which came out in the House of Lords debate at the end of last week from the Home Office based on partial returns from local authorities. But the honest answer is nobody knows how many children and young people in care are affected. But it will mean, and those good local authorities who are doing this work properly will acknowledge that some will miss out inevitably when we get to the deadline. So the second key reason I think that will happen is because of documentation. And by way of example, last autumn, our senior solicitor spent 2 days doing nothing but having appointments with children and young people, their social workers and personal advisors who were identified. So they'd already gone through that barrier. They had been identified as affected. They received advice about the appropriateness of making an application to the settlement scheme, but also about potential eligibility for British citizenship. And the expectation was that at the end of those 2 days, all those who were where it was appropriate to do so would have submitted an application. End of the 2 days, none of them were able to do so. And the primary reason for that is that they didn't have the relevant documentation. Some of that was to do with a lack of ID documents, and some of that was to do with a difficulty evidencing length of residence. And it's a typical story that we've heard already in other people's testimony today about disrupted life histories getting in the way of the documents that are required by the settlement scheme. And I think that was also reflected in the debates in the House of Lords at the end of last week, where even if you take the Home Office stats that were given, that there are 5,000 affected children in care and care leavers, the Home Office's take is that there are only 40% of those who got a successful settled status application granted. And one of the reasons for that is documentation. And certainly with the children and young people we're seeing, they're failing even to get to the point of making an application. And so they don't figure in a lot of the official statistics that are released and have to go down a paper route. I'll leave it at that, but people who are making these applications know about these things. The final reason I wanted to stress why children in care and care leavers will end up falling through the cracks is because of pre-settled status, which frankly is a ticking time bomb. For young children in care up to the age of 5, for those who can't evidence their 5 years in the UK, for those who haven't been in the UK for 5 years, there will be a second cliff edge that goes on past the end of the settlement scheme. And the problem with it in terms of this cohort is that the dates will be individual to individual children and young people, and local authorities, by and large, I believe, are not on top of this sufficiently in order to understand and proactively be supporting the effective upgrade that needs to happen to settled status, particularly when young people reach their 5 years and able to evidence it. This is particularly concerning for us, for those young people who will fall to be over 18 at the point at which this happens. So we would like to see automatic settled status for children in care and care leavers, with the ability, as Mihai has already signalled, to get physical proof of this status. We would also like to have clear assurances about what will happen to those who make late applications, with a really inclusive focus, so that there is you know, we're concerned about children and young people who may fall foul because of youth offending, for example, and could really do with some help for those of you who are involved in debates through the immigration bill and other informal channels about trying to get those assurances, so that inevitably, whenever the deadline is, if it's June or if by some miracle it ends up being some other time, that those who fall on the wrong side of it have some assurances about what will happen. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And I can see some more questions in the chat already. We are overrunning, so we'll try and get through as many as we possibly can, and there'll be lots more information being shared by RAMP after this meeting. Arndt, are you now with us, and can you hear me?
Yes, hello.
Brilliant. Thank you.
It's Arndt, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you so much for joining us. Please tell us the story.
So I'm come from the side from the self-employed. I started working in England in the year 2000, creating a Christmas market in a big English city, and started then living full-time in England in 2005. So when after Christmas last year, it was more or less clear how the division will go between the European Union and the United Kingdom. So beginning of the year, I'm starting the process to ask for my settled status. I found a company, Europina, which helped people out the paperwork. And then the EUSS was starting falling in. Therefore, I'm in event catering. From that moment where the lockdown came, I was not able to do any work anymore because there was no outdoor events, no food and drink festivals, no open air concerts or whatsoever. Therefore, I had to ask for universal credit. And then I found a problem that to get universal credit, I had to show them that I have settled status. But my application form in the Home Office was there from February till the 28th of August this year, when I get the confirmation for the settled status. So that 6 months was very problematically because, as I said, I couldn't apply for universal credit as the application was turned down. And then the other problem was when the government decided to put up programs to help companies over that time from the virus, I was again not able to apply for any program because officially I was not existing as long as I had not the application confirmed from the Home Office for my settled status. Talking to the bank, not possible, they wouldn't hear to me. And so I was hanging totally in the balance without any income. I had to close my business because, as I said, no chance to work. And I had the whole year absolutely no income till end of August, then the application came in. And then I get then backdated to end of August money from Universal Credit. Again, there wasn't the problem. I started the application for Universal Credit also in February, but this time was not covered and also no chance to get any money back for that time because I had the application for the settled status after 6 months. So Universal Credit said, yeah, sorry, but you have now settled status, we can give you now Universal Credit. So that, in short form, is my story to the whole thing.
Thank you, Arne. And it's a very well, it's a direct example of the kind of difficulties that many more people experience if we don't make sure more people are reached and supported to go through this process in time. Right, we have got through the whole of the panel. I'm sorry we're overrunning, but Sally Hammer, you had a question. Are you still there?
I do. I'm still here, and thanks very much to everybody who's spoken. This is quite specific. I was had a meeting with Luke Piper and others from the 3 Million with the Lord's Home Office Minister talking about what happens after the end of this year. and she and her official talked very positively about the communications that the Home Office will be starting to make sure, I'm using her sort of words, they reach all people who have not applied by the end of this year. Luke and I think both felt that this had the sort of flavour of a commercial operation, and I couldn't really see how it was going to be successful to reach the people that you've been talking about. I don't necessarily want responses this moment, but ideas about how the Home Office could be more imaginative and not just repeat what it's done so far unsuccessfully, I think would be really helpful, and I'd be very glad to keep passing them on, because I have a real fear, both for those who've not applied so far and for those who get pre-settled status and think that that's going to be the end of it. I mean, enough, rather than the end of it.
Thank you. Right, I don't know how the panel want me to do this, and it's a bit more difficult on Zoom, and I can see that being a brilliant audience and team almost on this call, nearly 100 people, but you've been answering questions as well as posing them, so I can see that some have been answered, but Louisa Gomez, do you still want to put a question? I can see that there's been some discussion in the chat group, but if you're still there and want to ask, now's your chance.
No, I was just asking about the continuous period, the absence of 6 months for the pre-settled status, but I think I was answered on the chat, so I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. And Catherine Maxwell Rose has said she's had to go. I'm going to assume she's not still on the call, but was asking about how COVID is impacting on processes. Do any of the panel want to chip in on that? I mean, I've raised this on behalf of constituents who are required to go through certain processes that they can't, simply because other English language centres and things aren't open, so it affects the process. But did the panel want to come in on this? Amanda, please, yeah, go ahead.
I think the only thing I would say is that certainly in conversations I've had with the Home Office, the effect of COVID has been viewed very singularly in terms of Home Office operations and not in terms of the wider context of people who might be applying. And so there doesn't seem to be an appreciation of the ongoing impact on children, young people and families or local authorities, for example, in terms of getting this to the top of people's to-do lists and then the practicalities of doing so.
Thank you. If any of the other panelists want to come in, can you?
Well, so just briefly, sorry, this is Rosie from the Angelou Centre, just very briefly to come in with two things. It's just thinking about the disproportionate impact of COVID on some communities, particularly Black minoritized communities, people with certain ethnic racial backgrounds, but also thinking about how many women, because of COVID, have actually been trapped in further abusive situations. And we saw a 40% increase in terms of referrals to our services, but also in terms of levels of violence, and the threshold of violence as well as massively increased. So those are other barriers for them being able to.
Just one thing to add, Neil, sort of the unknowns we couldn't necessarily anticipate because of COVID. I definitely have had a surge of contacts from students who are locked outside the UK, who are studying remotely, who aren't able to come to the UK, and there's a real anxiety amongst them. I'm hearing this across universities across the UK who aren't able to travel here, and they won't be able to get here before December. And so that's a very specific example of the effect of COVID. It's not just the procedural points, as Amanda was alluding to there. It is bleeding into other problems as well, like that, for example.
Thank you, that's really helpful. And I'm trying to fish through this, there's quite a lot in there. Noelia Martinez, I can see you thanked people for information, but do you still have a question?
Hi, no, I asked a question, but this was answered in the chat, and I'm happy to give my space to someone else. Thank you.
Fantastic, right. Well, I can't, correct me if I'm wrong, those who are monitoring all this, I can't actually see any further.
I think Mihai wanted to say something.
Mihai, brilliant, please do.
Yes, regarding the communication bit, what we've seen missing so far was the Home Office involving institution like education, like schools in the communication, employers, which we know will be expected to check on people's status, but at the moment they don't have a role in informing people about that. And schools, we've seen from our experience, vast majority of them have a very limited information regarding EUSS and its impact on their EU children. And what Home Office is not doing, from our point of view, is not working with communities directly to communicate this to those that are vulnerable in a way that is accessible for the community through the channels that are trusted by the communities. Thanks.
Thanks, Mihai. And I think we've slightly overrun, so I will thank everyone for participating, and especially thank you to those who've been answering questions within the chat. I think that's been really helpful, and I know that further information will be shared with everyone who signed up for the meeting. So thank you, a huge thank you to panelists, a massive thank you to IMIX and particularly Matteo Bissana, who's, I think it's your first meeting today. I hope you enjoyed it. And thank you to Laura Taylor, Vinya Murta, head of staff at RAMP. Does someone from RAMP want to flag up when the next meeting is, or do you just do this by email for group, for those who are signed up as all-party group observers? Does anyone from RAMP want to say anything briefly, quickly?
We'll be in touch about any further events if you've signed up to our mailing list, so nothing right now.
Superb. And if anyone wants to get in touch with RAMP, please remember it's APPG migration@rampproject.org if you want to submit any other questions or want to participate in future meetings or suggest bits for future meetings. All right. I've got quite a few takeaway actions. I'm not going to try and summarize what was quite an in-depth and complex discussion, but I've got a whole range of parliamentary questions that I'll be tabling, and I hope the group can share with everyone on the back of this. And if there are organisations or signed up who want to work more closely with me on specific issues, then please get in touch through RAMP or directly. Right, any final points, comments before we close? No? Everyone's in shock. Right, well, brilliant. Thank you again to the whole panel, and thank you again to everyone for attending, and to IMIX and RAMP for facilitating. Thank you.